The man hit the platform before anyone moved to catch him. He was big, broad-shouldered, and he went down hard, one hand clutching the front of Harriet's coat, dragging her with him until she was on her knees in the dirt, beside a dying stranger whose blood was already soaking through her sleeve. Around them, the crowd of Redemption Creek took one collective step back. Not forward, back. Harriet looked up at their faces, every one of them, and saw the same thing in every pair of eyes. They knew who he was, and not one of them intended to help. So she did. Stay with me until the very last word of this story. Hit that like button right now, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, do it now, because stories like this one only get told once. The man hit the platform before anyone moved to catch him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who looked like he did not fall down often. And when he went fast. One moment upright, the next crumpling sideways off the bottom step of the train car. One hand shooting out and catching the front of Harriet Calloway's coat as he fell. She went down with him, both knees hitting the wooden planks hard, the weight of him pulling her close enough that she could see the exact color of his eyes when they found hers. Dark brown, completely alert, in tremendous pain. "Don't," he said. The word was barely sound. "Don't call for help." Around them, the crowd of Redemption Creek had taken one collective step back. Not toward them, back. Harriet looked up at their faces. A woman in a blue dress, two men in work clothes, a boy of maybe 12, and saw the same expression on every one of them. Recognition. And the very deliberate choice not to act on it. They knew who this man was, and not one of them intended to help him. Harriet looked back down. "Where are you hit?" she said. His jaw tightened. "Left side. Yesterday. I can see how long it's been." The blood on his shirt was dried dark at the edges and fresh red at the center. A wound that had been badly managed and had kept moving anyway. "Can you walk if I take your arm?" "I walked off that train." "You fell off that train. That's different." She got her arm under his before he could argue. "There's a boarding house 2 doors down. We're going to stand up slowly, and we're going to walk there, and you are not going to fall again, because I am not strong enough to catch you a second time. Do you understand?" Something moved through his expression that was not quite a smile, but was in the same territory. "Yes, ma'am." They stood. He was heavier than he looked, which was saying something. And the sound he made when he got upright was the sound of a man who had been holding back that sound for a very long time. Harriet kept her arm locked through his and walked. The crowd parted for them without a word. She did not look at any of them. She kept her eyes on the door of Ruth McAllister's boarding house, and she counted her steps, and she did not let herself think yet about the telegram in her coat pocket, or the $4 in her purse, or the fact that she had arrived in this town 20 minutes ago and already had a bleeding stranger's weight on her arm. There would be time for thinking. Right now, there was only the door, and the 12 steps between her and it, and the man beside her who was working very hard to stay on his feet. They made it. Ruth McAllister opened the door before Harriet could knock, looked at the two of them once, and stepped back to let them in without a word. That single gesture told Harriet more about Ruth McAllister than an hour of conversation could have. "Back room," Ruth said. "The bed's already made up." "You were expecting someone," Harriet said. "I was expecting trouble. Trouble usually needs a bed." Ruth was already moving down the hall. "Bring him." The back room was small and clean, with a single window that faced the alley and a bed with an iron frame and a wool blanket folded at the foot. Harriet got the man to the edge of the mattress, and he sat down heavily, both hands braced on his knees, breathing through his teeth. "I need my bag," Harriet said to Ruth. "I left it on the platform." "I'll get it. Ruth pointed at the man. "Don't die in my sheets. I just washed them." She left. The man almost laughed. It came out as a controlled exhale instead, but it was close. "She's something," he said. "She's practical." Harriet was already working on the buttons of his coat. "I need to see the wound. I'm going to need you to hold still." "I've been holding still for 18 hours. "You've been moving for 18 hours with a wound that needed to be still. That's the opposite of holding still." She got the coat off and dropped it on the floor. His shirt beneath was ruined, dark and stiff. "I'm going to cut this. Don't argue with me." "Wasn't planning to." She pulled the small scissors from her skirt pocket. She always had scissors, always had matches, always had the 3 things Thomas had told her a person needed to survive any emergency, and cut the shirt from hem to collar in 4 clean strokes. The wound was on his left side, below the ribs. Entry wound, no exit. The bullet was still in him. It had been in him for... She pressed 2 fingers to the skin around it, reading the heat and swelling the way her mother had taught her, before Thomas had taught her the words for what her mother had known. At least 36 hours. The infection was beginning, but had not taken hold. She had time. Not much, but some. "What's your name?" she said, working. A pause. Brief, but there. "Jake Merritt." She filed that pause away without commenting on it. "Where did this happen, Mr. Merritt?" "North of town. Old property near the canyon." Harriet's hands stilled for just a moment. Then she kept working. "Marcus Hale's property?" This pause was longer. "I don't know whose property it was. I was passing through." People passing through don't generally take bullets and keep riding for 36 hours without stopping for help. She looked up at him. He was watching her with those very direct, dark eyes, giving nothing away. "There's a doctor in town?" "I was told the nearest doctor is 40 miles east." "You were told." She sat back on her heels. "By whom?" He said nothing. Ruth came back with Harriet's bag. She set it on the floor beside Harriet, looked at the wound with the calm assessment of a woman who had seen hard things and catalogued them without drama, and said, "I'll boil water." "Thank you." Harriet opened the bag. She had packed it the way she always packed it since Thomas died. Not for the life she had been living, which required none of it, but for the life she had come from, which had required all of it. Yarrow, clean linen cut into strips. The small steel probe that had been Thomas's and that she had never been able to leave behind. Carbolic solution in a brown bottle that she had refilled 3 times in the past year, even though she had no patience and no legal right to treat them, and nothing but habit and stubbornness keeping her prepared. "The bullet needs to come out," she said. "I can do it, but I want you to understand what that means before I start." "It means it's going to hurt." "It means it has to happen now, in this room, without proper surgical conditions, and if you move at the wrong moment, I could do more damage than the bullet did." She met his eyes. "I've done this before. 4 times. All 4 patients lived. But you should know what you're agreeing to." He studied her for a moment. "You're not a doctor." "No, but you know what you're doing." "Yes." Another moment. Then he nodded once, short and definitive, the nod of a man who made decisions the same way he did everything else, without wasted motion. "Do it." Ruth came back with the water. She looked at the probe in Harriet's hand, looked at Jake Merritt's face, and said, "I'll hold him." "I don't need," he started. "You absolutely need," Ruth said, and sat down on the bed beside him and put her hands on his shoulders with the firm authority of a woman who had held down injured men before and had no patience for their opinions about it. Harriet worked fast. Fast was kinder, in the end, than slow and careful. Slow and careful was for surgical theaters with proper light and anesthesia and 3 trained assistants. Fast, in a back room in Redemption Creek with a wool blanket and boiled water, was the only mercy available. She found the bullet in 40 seconds. It took another 30 to get it out clean. Jake Merritt made one sound. One. Low and involuntary and immediately suppressed. His hands gripped the iron bed frame hard enough that his knuckles went white, and his eyes went to the ceiling and stayed there, and he did not move. Ruth met Harriet's eyes over his shoulder and gave a single approving nod. Harriet cleaned the wound, packed it with yarrow, and bound it tight. When she finished, she sat back and let herself breathe for the first time since the platform. "Done," she said. He looked down from the ceiling. His color was bad, the gray of a man who had just spent his last reserve, but his eyes were clear. "Thank you, Mrs. Calloway." She began cleaning the probe. "Rest now. Don't try to stand before morning. If the fever comes before then, call for me." "How will I know if it's fever?" "You'll know." She stood, her knees aching. "You'll feel like the room is moving. You'll feel like every sensible thought you have is very far away." She looked at him steadily. "Though I suspect for you, that might be difficult to distinguish from your normal state." The corner of his mouth moved, definitely closer to a smile this time. "You don't know my normal state." "No," she agreed. "I don't." She picked up her bag and walked to the door. Ruth followed her into the hall and pulled it mostly closed behind them. "He wrote in 3 days ago," Ruth said, her voice low. "Said he was looking for ranch work. Nobody hired him. He's been asking questions about land records at the county clerk's office." She paused. "Birch's men have been watching him since the 2nd day." Harriet absorbed this. And today, someone shot him. Today, someone tried to. Ruth's expression did not change. "He's not a ranch hand." "No." "Do you know what he is?" "Not yet." Harriet looked at the closed door. "Did Marcus's letter reach you?" Ruth reached into her apron pocket and produced an envelope, worn at the edges, sealed with plain wax. "He left it with me 3 weeks before he died. Said to give it to you when you came." She held it out. "He was certain you would come." Harriet took it. "He knew me well. He said you were the most stubborn woman he'd ever met, and that was why he trusted you with this." Ruth's voice was dry, but not unkind. He meant it as a compliment. Harriet opened the envelope in the dim hallway, standing close to the window for the light. Marcus's handwriting was cramped and forward-leaning, the hand of a man who wrote in a hurry and thought faster than his pen. "Harriet," it began, "if you're reading this with Ruth, then I'm gone, and I'm sorry for it. There is something happening in this valley that is bigger than my land or any one man's land. Edgar Birch and the Burlington Railroad have been filing false deeds with the county clerk, transferring ownership of properties from families who have held them for 20 years to a shell company that sells directly to the railroad at 5 times the value. 3 families have lost their land this way. 2 men who tried to fight it are dead. I am likely to be the 3rd by the time you read this. I have the original deeds. I have letters between Birch and the railroad's attorney that prove the arrangement. I have enough to take to a federal marshal if someone can carry it that far. Everything is hidden in the northwest corner of my barn, beneath the 3rd floorboard from the east wall. Get there before Birch's men do. And Harriet, be careful who you trust. This town has more watchers than it has honest men." She folded the letter and put it in her pocket. "The barn," she said, "still standing. County seized the land on paper, but no one's moved on to it yet. They're waiting for the final sale to process." Ruth watched her face. "It's 4 miles north, past the creek." "I'll go at first light." "I'd go tonight if I were you. Birch doesn't know you have that letter. By morning he might."
Harriet looked at her. "How long has he had this town?"
"Long enough that people have forgotten what it looked like before."
Ruth's voice was flat and tired and absolutely resolved.
"Long enough that the men who remember are dead." She paused. "Marcus remembered. That's why he's dead too."
Harriet set her bag down on the hall table and opened it. She took out the brown bottle of carbolic, the remaining linen strips, and the small packet of yarrow, and set them beside the door to the back room. "If his fever rises before I'm back," she said, "use the yarrow in boiled water. Damp cloth on his forehead. Change it every 20 minutes. Ruth looked at the supplies, then at Harriet.
"You're going now. In the dark."
"You said yourself I shouldn't wait."
"I said I would go tonight if I were you. I'm 60 years old, and I know this land. You've been here 40 minutes. Then tell me which way to go, and I won't get lost."
Harriet closed her bag. "I didn't travel 6 days on a train to stand in a hallway while someone else's evidence gets found first." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she went to the kitchen and came back with a lantern, a wrapped parcel that smelled of bread and salt pork, and a look on her face that was somewhere between exasperation and respect. "Stay on the north road. Don't cut through the canyon after dark. When you see the cottonwood trees leaning east, the barn is 50 yards past them on the left." She pressed the lantern into Harriet's hand. "And if you see any of Birch's men out there, you blow out the light, and you get flat on the ground, and you do not move."
"I understand."
"Do you?" "Because most people say they understand, and then they do the brave, foolish thing anyway." Harriet looked at her steadily.
"Those aren't mutually exclusive."
She went out the back door into the Wyoming dark. The night was cold and enormous, the kind of cold that came from altitude, an open land, and a sky with nothing between it and the earth to hold in any warmth. The lantern threw a small circle of gold around her feet. She walked inside that circle and kept her breathing even and did not let herself think about what came after the barn. After she had the documents, if they were still there, if no one had found them, if she could get back before dawn. One thing at a time, the barn first, everything else after. She heard the cottonwood trees before she saw them, the dry rattle of their leaves in the wind. She counted 50 yards and turned left, and the barn was there, a low, dark shape against the darker sky. There was a light inside. Harriet stopped. She blew out her lantern. She stood completely still in the dark and looked at the thin line of light showing under the barn door and thought about what that meant and what to do about it. Then she heard the voice, low, male, with an edge of controlled anger. "I said I don't know where she put them." A second voice, harder. "You were on this property all day yesterday. You told Birch you'd searched every inch." "I did search it." "Then how come the floorboard's been moved?" Silence. Then the first voice, quieter. "Someone was here before us." Harriet pressed herself flat against the exterior wall of the barn and breathed through her nose and thought very fast. The documents were already gone. Someone had gotten there first, sometime between Marcus hiding them and tonight, which meant either Birch's men had them or someone else entirely did, someone who knew where to look and when to come. Someone like a man who had been asking questions at the county clerk's office for 3 days. Someone who had then gotten himself shot and ended up on a train platform in Harriet's arms. Jake Merritt. The name settled in her chest like a stone dropping into still water. The pause when she'd asked his name. The careful lie about passing through. The way he'd looked at her when she said Marcus Hale's property. Not blank,
not confused, but contained. The look of a man pressing down on something he already knew. The documents were not in the barn. She was nearly certain they were in Ruth McAllister's back room, tucked somewhere on the person of a man with a fresh bullet wound and dark, careful eyes, who had told her his name was Jake and let her save his life without telling her a single true thing about why he was here. Inside the barn, something heavy scraped across the floor. Harriet turned and walked back the way she had come, fast and silent in the dark, and did not light the lantern until she was far enough away that the light would not reach the barn. She walked back to Redemption Creek, with her jaw set, and her mind running through everything Jake Merritt had said to her, and everything he hadn't. And by the time she reached Ruth's back door, she had made two decisions. The first was that she would go back into that room, and she would sit down, and she would not leave until he told her everything. The second was that whatever he was hiding, whatever he had come here to do, whatever side of this he was on, she was going to need him. Because Marcus Hale had trusted her with the truth about what was happening in this valley, and the truth needed more than one person to carry it out safely. And the only other person in Redemption Creek who appeared to know what that truth was had a bullet hole in his side and owed her his life. She pushed open the back door. She walked down the hall. She did not knock. Jake Merritt was sitting up against the headboard with his eyes open, which told her he had not slept, which told her he had been thinking, which told her they were both arriving at the same moment from different directions. "The floorboard's been moved," she said. "Birch's men are in the barn right now, trying to figure out who got there first." He looked at her for a long moment, not surprised, not even close to surprised. "Close the door," he said. She did. "Sit down, Mrs. Calloway." "I'll stand." The almost smile again, just for a second. Then it was gone, and what replaced it was something steadier, something that looked like a decision being made. He reached under the mattress and pulled out a folded oilskin packet and held it out to her. "My name is not Jake Merritt," he said. "It's Wade Callahan. I work for the Federal Marshal's Office out of Cheyenne, and those are the documents Marcus Hale died to protect." Harriet looked at the packet in his outstretched hand. She looked at his face. She thought about $4.11 and a dead man's promise, and 6 days on a train, and 40 minutes in Redemption Creek that had already cost her more than most people spent in a year. She took the packet. "Start talking," she said. "And this time, tell me something true." Wade Callahan did not look like a man who was used to explaining himself. He looked like a man who had spent a long time being the one who asked questions, not answered them. And the shift sat uncomfortably on him the way an ill-fitting coat sits on broad shoulders, visible and slightly wrong. He took a breath. Then he said, "How much do you know?" "I know Marcus Hale is dead, and it wasn't his heart." Harriet set the oilskin packet on the small table beside the bed without opening it. "I know Edgar Birch has been filing false deeds with the county clerk. I know at least 3 families have lost their land, and 2 men who tried to fight it are dead." She crossed her arms. "I know you've been in this town for 3 days asking questions at the clerk's office, and that Birch's men shot you for it." She met his eyes. "Your turn." Wade was quiet for a moment, reading her the way she had learned to read him, quickly, thoroughly, looking for what was held back as much as what was offered. Then he reached up and pressed 2 fingers to the bandaging on his side, not adjusting it, just checking, the reflex of a man reminding himself what the stakes of the next few minutes were. "I was sent here 6 weeks ago," he said. "Not as myself. The Marshal's office got a letter from Marcus Hale in early September. He said he had documents proving a coordinated land fraud scheme operating across 4 counties in Wyoming Territory. He said the scheme involved a sitting county councilman, 2 attorneys, a clerk's office deputy, and a direct line to the Burlington Railroad's acquisition department.
He paused.
He said he'd been trying to get the information to a federal authority for 3 months and that every attempt had been intercepted. Intercepted how? 2 letters that never arrived. One man he trusted, who turned out to be on Birch's payroll. Wade's jaw tightened. Marcus was careful. But Birch had been building this operation for 5 years. He had people everywhere. So the marshal's office sent you. They sent me as Jake Merritt, ranch hand, drifting through looking for work. Untraceable. No connection to any federal office. He looked at her steadily. It worked for 3 days. Until it didn't. Until it didn't. He shifted against the headboard, and the slight hitch in his breathing told her the movement cost him. I made contact with Marcus the first evening. He gave me the location of the documents, the barn, the floorboard. We agreed I would retrieve them after dark on the 3rd day and ride for Cheyenne the same night. But Marcus died on the 2nd day.
Marcus died on the 2nd day.
Something moved through his expression, brief and honest and dark. I found out when I went to meet him and found the property locked up and 2 of Birch's men posted at the road. He paused. I went around through the canyon, got the documents from the barn before they thought to search it. Another pause, shorter. Almost got back out. They shot you on the property. In the canyon behind it. I made it to the train because the alternative was lying down in the canyon, and I wasn't prepared to do that. Harriet thought about the man she had seen collapse on the platform, the deliberate way his eyes had found hers, the single word he had said, "Don't call for help." Not a man in shock. A man making a calculated decision in the middle of catastrophic pain. "Why didn't you want help called?" she said. "On the platform." "Because I didn't know who in this town was safe." He met her eyes. "I still don't know who in this town is safe. Except possibly you." "Possibly? You came in on the noon train. You haven't spoken to anyone except Ruth McAllister, who Marcus trusted enough to leave his letter with. And you pulled a bullet out of a stranger in a boarding house back room without asking for anything in return." The corner of his mouth moved. "You're either the most dangerous person in Redemption Creek or the safest. I'm operating on the assumption it's the latter." Harriet said nothing for a moment. Outside, the wind pressed against the window with that low, constant sound. She thought about Marcus's letter. Trust no one in this town who hasn't earned it. She thought about the fact that Wade Callahan had earned approximately nothing from her yet. That all she had was his word and the oilskin packet on the table, and the way he'd held still while she took a bullet out of him. She thought about the way his eyes had found hers on the platform. Not random. Not desperate. Chosen. "The documents in that packet," she said, "what exactly are they?" "Original land deeds from 7 properties. Letters between Birch and a Burlington Railroad attorney named Harlan Voss, confirming the arrangement. Birch files false transfer deeds with the clerk's office. The properties go to a shell company. The shell company sells to the railroad at 400% above assessed value. Birch and Voss split the difference." He paused. "And a ledger. Marcus kept a ledger of every transaction, every date, every name. He'd been recording it for 18 months. That's enough for an arrest. That's enough for 6 arrests and a federal investigation that takes down the Burlington Railroad's entire Wyoming acquisition operation." His voice was flat and precise, "which is why Birch cannot allow that packet to reach Cheyenne." Harriet looked at the packet on the table. It was not large. It was not heavy. It looked like nothing. Worn oilskin wrapped around papers that had cost Marcus Hale his life, and Wade Callahan a bullet, and 2 dead men she would never know their names. "How do you get it to Cheyenne?" she said. "That's the problem." He said it without self-pity, simply, as a man stating the coordinates of a difficult situation. I can't ride. Not for at least 4 or 5 days, and even then not hard. The wound will reopen if you push it. Yes, I told you that. Birch's men know someone retrieved those documents from the barn. They don't know who yet, but by morning they'll have talked to every person on that platform, and someone will remember the man who fell and the woman who helped him. He looked at her with those direct, dark eyes. Which means you're already in this, whether you chose to be or not. The bluntness of it was oddly steadying. Harriet had found, in the 2 years since Thomas died, that she handled hard truths better than careful reassurances. Careful reassurances required her to pretend she couldn't see what was in front of her. Hard truths just required her to think. "You need time to heal enough to ride," she said. "And you need to stay hidden while you do it. Birch's men will search the boarding houses." "Yes. Ruth's house will be first on their list, since she's known to have helped people Birch didn't like." "Yes. So you can't stay here?" "No." She thought for a moment. "Marcus's house. The county sees the land, but no one's moved onto the property yet. You said yourself Birch's men have already searched it and found the floorboard empty. They won't go back." Wade was quiet. She could see him turning it over, checking it from different angles, the way a careful person checks ice before walking on it. "It's 4 miles north in open terrain. Getting me there tonight." "I'm not suggesting tonight. I'm suggesting before dawn, when there's enough light to move quickly, but not enough for anyone in town to be watching the North Road." She looked at him. "Can you sit a horse?" "If the horse is calm." "Ruth has a horse. I'll ask her." "Mrs. Calloway." His voice stopped her. She looked back. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read, something that sat between professional assessment and something more personal, something he was keeping at arm's length with visible effort. "You understand what you're taking on. If Birch finds out you're involved—" "Birch already has my friend's blood on his hands," Harriet said, "and the land Marcus meant to give me, and the future I came here to build." Her voice was very steady. She had not known until she said it how true it was. "I'm already involved, Mr. Callahan. I was involved before I stepped off that train. I just didn't have all the information." He held her gaze for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted. Not softened exactly, but opened, the way a door opens when someone finally uses the right key. "Wade," he said. "What?" "My name is Wade. You've taken a bullet out of my side." Mr. Callahan seems excessive at this point. Despite everything, the cold, the exhaustion, the weight of Marcus's letter in her pocket, and the oilskin packet on the table, and the low, relentless sound of wind against glass, Harriet felt something in her chest ease by approximately 1 degree. "Harriet," she said. He nodded once, the same decisive nod she had seen on the platform, the one that meant a decision had been made and would not be unmade. She picked up the packet from the table and held it out to him. "You should keep this on you. If something separates us—" "Keep it," he said. "If something separates us, Birch's men will search me first. They don't know about you yet." He paused. "And you've already proven you make good decisions under pressure." Harriet looked at the packet in her hand. She thought about the fact that she was standing in a boarding house back room in Wyoming territory at 2 in the morning, holding federal evidence in a land fraud case, having arrived in this town less than 12 hours ago. She thought about what Thomas would say if he could see her. Probably something precise and affectionate and slightly exasperated, in that order. She put the packet in her medical bag, between the carbolic bottle and the clean linen, and fastened the clasp. Ruth McAllister was not asleep. Harriet found her in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and the particular alertness of a woman who had decided some time ago
that sleep was a luxury she could manage without. She listened to Harriet's plan without interrupting, her expression giving away nothing, her eyes giving away everything. The quick calculation, the weighing of risk against risk, the moment when the decision landed. "The sorrel mare," Ruth said.
"She's calm, and she's quiet, and she won't spook if he's unsteady in the saddle." She stood up. "I'll need her back." "You'll have her back." Ruth looked at her for a moment. "Marcus said you were the most stubborn woman he'd ever met." She picked up her coffee cup and turned toward the stove. "He was right. Get some sleep. 2 hours. I'll wake you before it gets light." "I don't think I can sleep." "You operated on a gunshot wound tonight. Your hands need rest, even if your head doesn't." Ruth did not turn around. 2 hours, Harriet. You're no good to anyone running on nothing." Harriet slept. She did not expect to, but she lay down on the narrow bed in the room across the hall from Wade's and closed her eyes, and was gone within minutes. The deep, dreamless sleep of a body that had reached its limit and simply stopped. When Ruth's hand touched her shoulder 2 hours later, she came awake cleanly and completely, sitting up before she was fully conscious, her hand going to the medical bag beside the bed by reflex. "Time," Ruth said quietly. "I've got the mare saddled." The yard behind the boarding house was dark and cold, the sky beginning to separate from black into something slightly less absolute. The first suggestion of gray at the eastern edge. Wade was already on his feet when Harriet came into the back room, leaning against the wall with his coat on and his jaw set against what it cost him to be vertical. "You should have stayed down until I came for you," Harriet said. "I've been horizontal for long enough." He straightened carefully. "How's the mare?" "Calm. Ruth says she's steady." Harriet looked at him the way she looked at patients, directly, clinically, with the part of her mind that dealt in data instead of feeling. He was pale, and his breathing was controlled in the deliberate way of a man managing pain by sheer decision. But his eyes were clear and his balance was good. He would make it 4 miles. Probably. "You ride, I'll walk alongside." "You don't need to. If you come off that horse in the dark, I cannot get you back on it alone. I'll walk alongside." She held his gaze. "This is not a negotiation." The almost smile. "No, ma'am." Ruth met them in the yard with the mare's reins in one hand and a folded blanket in the other. She handed the blanket to Harriet without comment, and then held the mare steady while Wade mounted, a process that involved one sharp hiss of breath and about 30 seconds of what Harriet privately classified as extraordinary stubbornness in the service of necessary function. When he was up and settled, Ruth looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Harriet. Something passed between the two women that didn't need words. The particular understanding of people who had both spent time being told a situation was impossible and had both responded by doing the thing anyway. "I'll send word if Birch's men come asking," Ruth said. "How?" Harriet said. "The boy who delivers my milk lives on the North Road. He knows those 4 miles the way you know your own name." Ruth patted the mare's neck once. "He'll find you." They moved out through the back gate into the alley, and then north along the edge of the road, staying off the main track, the mare's hooves quiet in the soft dirt. Harriet walked at the horse's left shoulder, one hand resting lightly on the stirrup in case she needed to move fast. The cold was the kind that lived in the bones, not just on the skin, and it pressed in around them with a particular intimacy of very early morning. Wade did not speak for the first mile. He rode the way she had expected him to ride, still economical, expending nothing that didn't need to be expended. She could see the effort it cost him in the set of his shoulders, and she did not remark on it. After the 2nd mile, he said quietly, "How did you end up here?" Harriet considered not answering. Then she thought about what she had said to him in the back room, that she was already in this, that she had been in it before she stepped off the train, and decided that the same honesty she had demanded from him was the least she could offer in return. "My husband died 2 years ago," she said. "He was a doctor. He got sick treating patients who couldn't pay him, and he died of it and left me with his debts and his medical bag, and the knowledge of how to do a job I'm not allowed to do legally." She kept her voice even, the way she had learned to talk about Thomas, directly, without the careful management of grief that people expected and that she had never been able to perform convincingly. "Marcus Hale was my mother's oldest friend. He wrote to me when he heard about Thomas. Said he wanted to give me his land, a chance to start over somewhere that didn't know me as someone's widow." She paused. It was the first time in 2 years that anyone had offered me something that wasn't pity. Wade was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry about your husband." "Thank you. And I'm sorry about the land." "The land isn't gone yet." She said it the way she said most things she needed to be true, flatly, firmly, as a statement of fact rather than hope. "That's what the packet is for." She felt him look at her in the dark, though she kept her eyes on the road ahead. "You said you've taken a bullet out 4 times, he said. "Where did you learn that?" "Thomas taught me the procedure. My mother taught me everything before that. Herbs, setting bones, managing fever. She wasn't a doctor either. She was just a woman who knew things and taught them to me because she said knowledge was the one thing no one could take away from a woman." Harriet paused. "She was wrong about that, actually. They can take it away. They just can't stop you from using it when you're alone in a room with someone who's dying and there's no one else." "No," Wade said quietly. "They can't stop that." The cottonwood trees appeared out of the dark, their leaves rattling in the pre-dawn air, and Harriet counted 50 yards and turned left, and the shape of Marcus's barn and house rose against the lightening sky. No lights, no horses, no movement. They stopped at the edge of the property and waited for 30 seconds, both of them still and listening, reading the silence for anything inside it. The silence was clean. "All right," Harriet said. The house was locked, but not barred. A simple latch that yielded to the knife Ruth had pressed into Harriet's hand as they left without explanation, only the look of a woman who had learned to anticipate what was needed. Inside, the house smelled of dust and wood smoke, and the particular absence of someone who had been there recently and was not anymore. Marcus's absence sat in the rooms like a presence of its own. She got Wade to the back bedroom and onto the narrow bed with less difficulty than she had expected, which told her the ride had cost him more than he was showing. She checked the bandaging in the thin gray light coming through the curtains, changed the dressing with the supplies in her bag, and told him what she had told him at Ruth's. "Don't try to stand before I say you can. I mean it this time. I heard you the first time. You were also on a horse 4 miles from where I told you to stay." The almost smile, exhausted this time, but genuine. "I was on a horse going where you needed me to go." Harriet looked at him for a moment. The light was coming up slowly outside, filling the room with something between dark and gray, soft and without definition. He looked, in this light, less like a federal agent running an operation and more like a man who was very tired and in a great deal of pain and trying not to make it anyone else's problem. She knew that particular kind of tired. She had seen it in Thomas. She had seen it in herself, in the mirror, in the year after he died. "Rest," she said. "I'm going to look through the house. Marcus may have left more than what's in the packet." Harriet. Her name in his voice, careful, deliberate. She stopped. "Whatever you find in here, whatever else Marcus left, it may make you a more direct target than you already are. You understand that?" "I understand that sitting still makes me a target too." She picked up her bag.
and I've never been very good at sitting still."
She left him there, in the growing light, and moved through Marcus Hale's empty house with quiet, methodical purpose, opening drawers and checking shelves, and running her hands along wall seams, the way her mother had taught her to look for things people hid. Not where valuables went, but where trust went, where the things too important to risk losing lived in the small, careful spaces people made for them. She found it in the kitchen, behind a loose stone in the fireplace wall. A small notebook, different from the ledger in the oilskin packet. Not figures and dates, but names. A list of names, with 2 columns beside each one. What they knew, what they were willing to say. Harriet sat down at Marcus's kitchen table in the early morning light and read every page. By the time she finished, the sun was fully up, and she understood 3 things she had not understood before. The first was that the fraud was larger than even Wade's briefing from the marshal's office had described. The second was that one of the names on Marcus's list was a woman, a widow named Clara Foss, who had lost her husband's ranch 6 months ago, and who Marcus believed had seen the false deed being filed in person. The third thing was that Clara Foss lived 2 miles east, and she was still alive. And if Birch knew Marcus had kept this notebook, she would not be alive much longer. Harriet closed the notebook and put it in her medical bag beside the oilskin packet, and stood up from Marcus's kitchen table with her jaw set and the particular focused calm of a woman who had stopped being surprised by what the world required of her, and had simply decided to meet it. She went back to the bedroom doorway. Wade was awake, watching the ceiling, which told her he had not slept at all. "There's a witness," she said. "A woman named Clara Foss. Marcus believes she saw the false deed being filed. She's 2 miles east, and Birch doesn't know Marcus kept her name written down." She held up the notebook. "But it's only a matter of time before he figures out there was more than the packet." Wade pushed himself upright, slowly, his eyes already sharp and working. "How fast can you get to her?" "On foot? An hour, maybe less." "Go," he met her eyes. "I'll be here when you get back." Harriet looked at him for a moment. At this man she had known for less than 8 hours, who had lied to her, and then told her the truth, and then trusted her with everything that mattered. Who had said, "I'll be here when you get back," with the quiet certainty of a man who intended to make it true. "Don't stand up," she said. "I heard you." "Wade." "Harriet." His voice was steady and direct and completely sincere. "Go." She went. The 2 miles east felt longer than they were. Harriet walked fast, her medical bag over one shoulder, and Marcus's notebook in her coat pocket, and she kept her eyes on the road ahead and her mind on what she knew about Clara Foss, which was almost nothing. A widow, a lost ranch, a name in a dead man's notebook with 2 words written beside it in Marcus's cramped hand. She saw it. That was all. 2 words that could mean everything or nothing, depending on whether Clara Foss was willing to say out loud what Marcus believed she had seen. The farmhouse appeared set back from the road, behind a line of bare branch trees. A modest place, well kept in the way that things are kept when the person keeping them has very little else to hold on to. Smoke coming from the chimney. A kitchen garden put to bed for winter with more care than most people bothered with. A dog that heard Harriet's footsteps 30 yards out and started barking from behind the fence with the particular urgency of a dog that understood its job was the only security this property had left. Harriet stopped at the gate and waited. That was what you did with farm dogs and frightened people. You stopped, and you waited, and you let them come to you on their own terms. The door opened. The woman who appeared in it was perhaps 50, lean and straight-backed, with gray-streaked hair and the careful stillness of someone who had learned to read approaching strangers the way other people read weather.
She looked at Harriet for a long moment without speaking. "Mrs. Foss," Harriet said, "my name is Harriet Calloway. I was a friend of Marcus Hale's." Something moved through the woman's expression. Not quite grief, not quite fear. The particular movement of a face when it hears a name it has been both dreading and waiting for. "Marcus is dead," Clara Foss said. "I know. I'm sorry."
Harriet kept her hands visible, her voice level. "He left a notebook. Your name is in it. He believed you could help us stop the man who killed him." Clara Foss looked at her for another long moment. The dog had stopped barking and was sitting at her feet now, watching Harriet with the same careful attention as its owner. Then Clara stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said, "quickly." The kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee and beeswax, and the particular industry of a woman who filled her hours with work because stillness left too much room for fear. Clara poured 2 cups without asking and set them on the table, and sat down across from Harriet with her hands wrapped around her own cup and her eyes very direct. "How did you know Marcus?" she said. "He was my mother's oldest friend. He wrote to me after my husband died. He wanted to give me his land." Harriet paused. "He wanted me to have a fresh start. He was always doing that," Clara said quietly. "Finding people who needed something and figuring out how to give it to them without making them feel like charity." She looked down at her cup. "He told me the same thing 6 months ago, when I lost the ranch. Said he would help me fight it. That he was gathering evidence." A pause. "I told him it was too dangerous. That Birch had too many men in too many places." "You were right that it was dangerous," Harriet said. "But the evidence exists. Marcus spent 18 months collecting it. We have the deeds, the letters, the ledger. And there's a federal marshal's agent in this county right now, ready to carry all of it to Cheyenne." She leaned forward slightly. "What we need is a witness. Someone who can say in front of a federal authority that they saw the fraud being committed in person, not just on paper." She met Clara's eyes. "Marcus believed that was you." Clara was quiet for a long moment. The fire settled in the grate. Outside, the dog made a small sound and was silent. "I went to the clerk's office last April," Clara said finally. "I wanted to see my husband's deed. George died in February, and I needed to understand what I had left, what I owned." Her hands tightened around the cup. "The deputy clerk, a young man named Sutter, he pulled the file, and I could see right away that something was wrong. The deed on record had George's signature, but George had never signed anything in his life that didn't have my name beside it. 40 years of marriage, every paper, every contract, side by side." Her voice did not waver. It had the quality of a voice that has said the hard things so many times in its own head that the saying of it aloud has become almost mechanical. "That signature was not his. I know George's hand the way I know my own face." "Did you say anything?" "I said I wanted to see the original. Sutter said the original was in county archive storage. I said I wanted to file a dispute. He said I needed an attorney." A short pause. "Birch's man was in the office that afternoon. He was standing at the back counter, pretending to read a notice. When Sutter told me I needed an attorney, this man said he knew a good one. Very helpful, very smooth." Clara looked at Harriet steadily. "I was back on my property by nightfall, with a visit from 2 of Birch's riders, telling me the county had assessed unpaid taxes on the property, and that I had 30 days to vacate or face removal." "You lost the ranch in 30 days?" 26. Clara's voice was flat and dry and absolutely without self-pity. "I had nowhere to go. My daughter is in Denver. I'm staying here in my sister's house." A pause. "My sister is also a widow, also on land that shares a boundary with the Burlington Railroad's projected route." The meaning of that sat in the air between them,
without needing to be elaborated. "Will you testify?" Harriet said. "To a federal authority. On record." Clara looked at her for a long moment.
"If I testify, and Birch finds out before that testimony reaches the right people, I'm dead. My sister is dead. She said it the way people say true things that they have already accepted. Not for effect, not for sympathy, just because it was accurate. Marcus found out. We see how that ended." "Marcus was alone," Harriet said. "You wouldn't be alone. We have the documents. We have a federal agent. We have—" She stopped. She had almost said, "We have Ruth McAllister, and the names of every family Birch has wronged, and a town that is more tired of being afraid than it knows yet." She didn't know if that was true. She knew it was what she needed to be true. "We have enough to move fast if we move now, before Birch knows what we have. The agent is ready to ride for Cheyenne within the week." "Within the week is a long time in this town." "I know." Harriet held her gaze. "But it's the only window we have." Clara was quiet. She looked down at her coffee cup, then at her own hands, then at something past Harriet's shoulder that was probably not in the room at all. Whatever she was looking at, she looked at it for a long time. "George built that ranch with his own hands," she said finally. 30 years. Started with nothing and ended with 300 acres and a breeding stock any man in the territory would have been proud of." Her voice was very quiet. "He died thinking it was going to his children and his children's children. He died thinking he had built something that would last." She looked at Harriet. Birch took that. Not just the land. The meaning of George's life. Everything he spent himself building. A pause that had the quality of a decision settling into place. "Yes, I'll testify." Harriet let out a breath she had been holding without knowing it. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Tell me what you need me to do." They talked for 20 minutes, quickly and specifically, Harriet laying out the plan the way Thomas had taught her to explain medical procedures, clearly, in order, without softening the hard parts. Clara listened with the focused attention of a woman who had survived 60 years on the frontier by paying close attention when it mattered. She asked 2 questions, both of them good ones. She did not flinch at anything. When Harriet stood to leave, Clara caught her arm. "There's something else," Clara said. "Something I didn't tell Marcus because I wasn't certain. I'm still not certain, but you should know." She paused. "Sutter, the deputy clerk, the one who pulled George's file that day." Another pause. "He came to my sister's house 2 weeks ago, at night. He was frightened. He said he wanted to talk about the deed records." She looked at Harriet. "I sent him away. I was afraid of a trap." She shook her head. "He hasn't come back. But if he's having second thoughts about what Birch has had him do, he might be willing to testify, too. Or he might already be dead. Or he might be the trap I thought he was." Clara's voice was careful. "I'm telling you because Marcus would have told you. Because you should know all of it, not just the parts that are easy." Harriet thought about Marcus's letter. Trust no one in this town who hasn't earned it. She thought about the particular usefulness of a county clerk's deputy who had processed every false deed and knew every name. A man like that, willing to talk, was worth more to a federal case than anything currently in the oilskin packet. A man like that, silenced before he could talk, was another death on Birch's ledger. "I'll look for him," Harriet said. Carefully. She was back on the road east when she heard the horse. One rider, coming from the direction of Redemption Creek, moving fast. Not the casual pace of someone with somewhere ordinary to be. Harriet stepped off the road into the scrub without thinking, and stood still and watched the rider pass 30 yards away without slowing. She recognized the horse before she recognized the man. The same well-kept animal she had seen tied outside Marcus's barn the night before. The horse that didn't belong to any rancher having a hard year. Birch's man, riding north, toward Marcus's property. Harriet did not think. She turned and moved. She went cross-country rather than staying on the road, cutting through the scrub brush and frozen grass in a straight line rather than following the road's curve, trading the easier surface for the shorter distance. Her boots were wrong for it. Her skirt caught twice on low branches, and she was breathing hard by the time the barn came into sight. But she was faster this way by 10 minutes at least, and 10 minutes was everything. The rider's horse was tied at the front of the property. She could see it from 50 yards out. She went around the back. The rear door of the house was the way she had left it, pulled mostly closed, the simple latch not fully engaged. She eased it open with one hand and went in low and quiet, the way she had gone into houses with Thomas when he was called to patients who might be frightened by a sudden entrance. The kitchen was empty. She heard the voices from the front of the house. 2 of them. One she didn't recognize. Flat, cold. The voice of a man who delivered bad news the way other people delivered mail, without particular emotion. The other voice she knew. Wade. "I told you," Wade was saying. His voice was completely steady, not the voice of a man caught in a situation, but the voice of a man managing one. "I'm a ranch hand. I was shot by someone I never saw. I came here because the house was empty and I needed somewhere to rest." "Whose horse is that in the barn?" "Found it wandering. Figured its owner would come looking." A pause. "Jake Merritt." "That's what you told people in town." "That's my name." "Funny thing," the other voice said, with the particular flatness of a man who did not find it funny at all. "Merritt's not a name anyone around here knows. No one hired you. No one saw you at the stockyards. No one knows where you came from." Another pause. "Mr. Birch likes to know where people come from. Mr. Birch is welcome to ask me himself. Mr. Birch sent me. Then Mr. Birch should have come himself." A beat. "I'll wait." Harriet stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at what she had. The situation was simple and bad. One of Birch's men was in the front room with Wade, who was wounded and in no condition to handle a physical confrontation, and who was also, she was acutely aware of this, the only person currently standing between the evidence in her medical bag and the man who wanted it destroyed. She looked at her medical bag. She looked at the kitchen around her. She looked at the cast iron skillet sitting on the cold stove. She picked up the skillet. Then she put it down. Then she straightened her coat, smoothed her hair with one hand, picked up her medical bag, and walked into the front room the way she had walked into every examination room in 4 years of assisting Thomas, as if she had every right to be there and was mildly irritated at being made to wait. The man was perhaps 40, heavy in the shoulders, with a deputy's badge that fit his vest better than the one on the boy at the barn had fit his. He turned when Harriet came in, his hand moving to his hip by reflex, and she held up her medical bag before he could do anything with that reflex. "I'm his nurse," she said, brisk and impatient. "If you've had him sitting upright, I'm going to have to redo the dressing. Gunshot wounds at his stage don't respond well to—" "Who are you?" The man stared at her. "Who are you?" "Harriet Calloway. I came in on yesterday's train. I'm a medical professional, and this man is my patient. Now either explain why you're in this room or step out and let me work." She looked at Wade as she said it. He was sitting in the chair by the window, upright, controlled, giving nothing away, but she could see the cost of it in the line around his mouth and the careful way he was breathing. His eyes met hers for just a fraction of a second. Not relief, something more specific than relief. The look of a man recalibrating a plan very quickly. "Medical professional," the deputy said slowly.
My husband was Dr. Thomas Calloway of Philadelphia. I trained under him for 4 years. She opened her medical bag on the side table and began removing instruments with the efficient confidence of long habit. This man was brought to my attention at the boarding house yesterday. He had a bullet in his left side and a fever coming on. I removed the bullet and stabilized him.
He needs rest and regular dressing changes, and instead, he's apparently been sitting up talking to—" she glanced at the badge, "to a county deputy, which is lovely for the county, but bad for his wound." The deputy looked at Wade. Wade looked at the deputy, with the patient blankness of a man who had absolutely nothing to hide, and was finding the whole conversation mildly inconvenient. "She talks a lot," Wade said. "Patients who rest properly don't require extensive talking," Harriet said without looking up. "Sir, I'm going to need you to let this man lie down. If you have questions for him, you can come back tomorrow." The deputy was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to be genuinely uncomfortable. Harriet kept her hands moving, kept her expression set in the mild professional irritation she had borrowed from 3 different doctors she had watched Thomas work with, and did not look at him directly. "Mr. Birch is going to want to speak with you," the deputy said finally. To Wade, not to Harriet. "I'll be here," Wade said. Another pause. Then the deputy moved toward the door, and Harriet felt the tension in the room change by approximately 10 degrees in the right direction. He stopped in the doorway. "You came in on yesterday's train," he said, to Harriet this time. "That's correct." "What brings you to Redemption Creek?" "I was told there was no doctor within 40 miles. She looked at him directly for the first time, with the practiced candor of someone who has learned that the most convincing lies are built around true things. "After my husband died, I needed somewhere I could be of use. I put out inquiries through the medical community. This town came up." She held his gaze. "Is that a problem?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he touched the brim of his hat in the gesture that looked like courtesy and felt like a door being left ajar rather than closed, and walked out. Harriet did not move until she heard his horse leave the yard. Then she sat down in the chair across from Wade and put her hands flat on her knees and breathed. "That was well done," Wade said. "Don't," she looked at him, "don't compliment me yet. He's going to tell Birch about me. Birch is going to ask questions. By tonight, he's going to know I arrived on the same train you were on, and that I set up inside Marcus Hale's house within 12 hours of arriving in this town." She met his eyes. "We have less time than we thought." Wade was quiet for a moment. She could see him thinking, the same way she thought. Not panicking, just reorganizing. Adjusting the map of the situation to account for the new information. "How did it go with Clara Foss?" he said. "She'll testify. And there's something else." Harriet told him about Sutter, the deputy clerk, the late-night visit to Clara's sister's house, the fear she had seen in him according to Clara's account. She told it quickly and completely, the way she had learned to report medical observations. Everything relevant, nothing extraneous. Wade listened without interrupting. "Sutter," he said when she finished. "You know the name. He's processed every false deed that's gone through that office. If he's willing to turn—" He stopped. "Where is he now?" "I don't know. Clara doesn't know. He came to her sister's house 2 weeks ago and hasn't been seen since." Harriet looked at him steadily. "Which could mean he's frightened and lying low. Or it could mean Birch found out he was having second thoughts." The fire had burned low in the grate. Outside, the morning had settled into the flat gray light of a winter day in Wyoming, and the silence of the property around them had the quality of something waiting, rather than something resting. "We need to move faster than a week," Harriet said. "I can't ride hard for at least 3 more days." "I'm not talking about you riding. I'm talking about getting word to the marshal's office in Cheyenne. Is there another way? Telegraph? Birch controls the telegraph office. Of course he does. She thought for a moment. Ruth said the circuit judge comes through twice a year. When is the next visit? 4 months out. Then we need someone who can ride to Cheyenne and isn't known to Birch. She looked at Wade. Someone who can carry the documents and Clara's signed statement and get it to the right hands before Birch realizes what's happened. Wade was quiet. She watched him think. Then something shifted in his expression. Not quite certainty, but the edge of it. Marcus's letter to the marshal's office, he said. When he first reached out to us, he used a name. Someone he said he trusted to carry messages. A rider, not local, who moved between here and Cheyenne every 2 weeks on a mail contract. Harriet felt something in her chest sharpen into focus. Does this person know about the case? They know there was a case. They don't know the details. He met her eyes. They were Marcus's fail-safe. If something happened to him before I arrived, this person was supposed to be contacted. Who contacts them? Ruth McAllister, Wade said. She's the only one in this town Marcus trusted with that name. Harriet stood up. She already had her coat on. She was already moving. Stay down, she said. I mean it this time. Harriet. His voice was very quiet. She stopped. Birch's man is going to report back within the hour. Wade's eyes were direct and absolutely serious. Once he does, this property won't be safe. We need a different location by tonight. I know. She looked at him. I'll handle it. How? She thought about Clara Foss and her sister's farmhouse 2 miles east. She thought about Ruth McAllister and the sorrel mare and the milk boy who knew the North Road like his own name. She thought about a town full of people who had been told for 5 years that Birch was untouchable, that the county was his, that the law was his, that their land and their names and their grief were his to do with as he pleased. She thought about what happened when people who had been told something long enough finally met someone who told them something different. Trust me, she said. Something in his expression shifted. That same opening she had seen before, the same key in the same door. He nodded once. She went out the back and started moving. Ruth McAllister listened without moving, without interrupting, without any of the small sounds people make when they are processing difficult information. She stood in her kitchen with her arms crossed and her eyes fixed on Harriet's face, and she listened to all of it. Birch's man at Marcus's house, Clara Foss and her testimony, Sutter, the deputy clerk, and his vanishing, the need for a rider to Cheyenne before Birch understood how much they had. And when Harriet finished, Ruth was quiet for exactly 5 seconds. Then she said, "Sit down." Harriet sat. Ruth went to the back of the kitchen, to the shelf above the dry goods where she kept a row of plain ceramic jars, labeled in her own handwriting. She moved 2 of them aside and reached behind them and produced a folded piece of paper that she brought back to the table and set in front of Harriet without comment. The paper had a name on it. One name, written in Marcus Hale's handwriting. Below it, 2 words. Completely reliable. Daniel Marsh, Harriet read. The mail rider? Carries the federal mail contract between Redemption Creek and Cheyenne. Comes through every 14 days. He was here 4 days ago, which means he'll be back in 10. Ruth sat down across from Harriet. But he has a relay stop at a ranch 12 miles south of here, overnight, every run. He'll be there tonight. 12 miles. On horseback, 2 hours. Less if you push. Ruth looked at her steadily. I'm not sending you 12 miles alone across open country with Birch's men watching the roads. I'm not asking you to send me. I'm asking for the horse. The horse I'll give you.
What I won't give you is a reason to get yourself killed before those documents reach anyone who can act on them." Ruth's voice was not unkind. It was the voice of a woman who had watched other people's bravery get them buried, and had decided that bravery without strategy was just a faster way to lose. "There's a better way." Harriet waited. "The milk boy," Ruth said. "Tommy Briggs, 14 years old, knows every back road in this county, and invisible in the way the children are invisible to men like Birch. Beneath notice, beneath suspicion." She paused. "Marcus used him twice. The boy knows to ask for Marsh by name and to say the word Marcus used to authenticate." She met Harriet's eyes. "But Tommy can't carry the documents. If he stopped and searched—" "He carries the message," Harriet said, following the logic. "Marsh comes to us instead of us going to him. Marsh has a reason to come into town anyway. Regular route. No one looks twice at the mail rider." Ruth nodded. "He comes through. He stops here for his usual coffee and meal, and you hand him everything in your bag in plain sight of anyone watching." Harriet thought about the deputy who had left Marcus's house an hour ago. She thought about the hour it would take him to reach Birch and report, and for Birch to respond. She thought about the particular mathematics of shrinking time and how the next 12 hours would determine everything that came after. "Tommy needs to arrive today," she said. "This morning." "Tommy rides for me every morning. No one will notice." Ruth stood up. "But first, you need to tell me about Sutter." Harriet told her. Ruth's expression did not change while she listened, but something behind her eyes shifted and settled in a way that told Harriet this was not entirely new information. "You know something about him," Harriet said. "I know he's been drinking at the saloon every night for 3 weeks. Alone. More than a man drinks when he's comfortable with himself." Ruth picked up her coffee cup and held it without drinking. "I know his mother lives in the county east of here, and that he sends money home every month. I know he's 24 years old, and that when he first came to this town, he used to stop in here for breakfast and talk about how he was going to save enough to open his own business in Denver someday." She set the cup down. "I know he hasn't been in for breakfast in 2 months. Where does he live?" "Rooms above the hardware store on the south end of Main Street." "Has anyone seen him in the last week?" Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Greer, at the dry goods, said she saw someone at his window 3 nights ago. Light on late, then gone." Harriet thought about Clara's account. A frightened young man at a door at night, turned away, not seen since. A man who had processed enough false deeds to understand exactly what he had been part of. A man who might be the difference between a case that held in federal court and one that Birch's attorneys could pick apart at the seams. If he's alive, and he's hiding, he needs to know there's a way out, Harriet said. He's not going to walk into the street and turn himself in. But if someone came to him privately and told him there was federal protection available, federal protection that currently consists of 1 wounded agent in a house that Birch already knows about, Ruth said, not unkindly, and documents that prove 6 years of coordinated fraud, and a witness willing to testify, and a mail rider who can have all of it in Cheyenne inside 4 days. Harriet met her eyes. That's not nothing, Ruth. Ruth looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet around them, the ordinary sounds of the boarding house going about its morning muffled and distant, belonging to a different world than the one happening at this table. No, Ruth said. It's not nothing. She stood up. I'll send Tommy, and I'll find out if Sutter is still in those rooms. She moved toward the hall. You need to go back to your patient, and you need to stay off the main street. Birch's man will be back through town within the hour, and I don't want him seeing you walking around like you own the place. I might need to own the place before this is over." Ruth stopped in the doorway and looked back at Harriet with an expression that was as close to a smile as Harriet had seen on her. "Marcus said the same thing about this town the first week he arrived here." She paused. 40 years ago. Harriet took the sorrel mare back to Marcus's property, along the back route Ruth had shown her, staying off the road, moving through the dry grass and frozen ground at a pace that was careful enough to watch for riders and fast enough to matter. The mare was exactly what Ruth had promised, calm and quiet, reading Harriet's inexperienced hands with the patient intelligence of an animal that had carried nervous riders before and understood that patience was its own kind of competence. Wade was where she had left him, which was to say, he was not in the bed where she had told him to stay, but in the chair by the front window where he could see the approach road, upright and alert, and not remotely apologetic about either fact. He looked at her when she came in, and she could tell from the way his eyes moved across her face that he was reading the situation the same way she would have read it, quickly, looking for the shape of the news before she spoke it. "Good and bad," she said, before he could ask. "Good first. Ruth has the rider's name. He'll be contacted today, and he'll come through on his regular mail route tomorrow, which means no one has a reason to notice him stopping here." She set down the medical bag and sat across from him. "Clara Foss will provide a signed statement. That goes with the packet." "And the bad?" "Birch's man has had time to report. We need to be somewhere else by nightfall." She looked at him steadily. "Clara's sister's farm is 2 miles east. Mrs. Foss is there, and she's already inside this with us. It's off the main road. Birch has no reason to move on it yet. And there are 2 women on that property who are done being afraid." She paused. "It's the best option we have." Wade considered this. She could see the part of him that wanted to push back, the part that had been running operations long enough to have opinions about safe houses and controlled environments and variables that could be managed. She could also see the part of him that had been in this room for 6 hours, with a bullet wound and a plan that was unraveling faster than either of them had anticipated. And that part was listening. "Sutter," he said. "Ruth is looking. If he's still in his rooms, she'll make contact today. If Birch has him, then we work with what we have without him. The packet and Clara's testimony are enough to open a federal investigation. Sutter is enough to close it." She met his eyes. "But we can't wait for him. We move tonight, and we get the documents to Marsh tomorrow, and we let the marshal's office in Cheyenne decide what comes next." Wade was quiet for a long moment. She had learned, in the past 24 hours, to read his silences. This one was not reluctance. It was the specific quiet of a man who was checking the plan against every angle he could think of, and not finding a better one. "All right," he said. "Can you ride 2 miles? I rode 4 miles last night." "You were also considerably more stubborn last night than your wound could support. The answer I need is an honest one." He looked at her with those direct, dark eyes. "Yes, I can ride 2 miles." "Good." She opened the medical bag. "Then let me look at the dressing first, and we'll move when the light starts to go." She changed the bandaging with the care and efficiency she brought to everything medical, which was to say, completely and without wasted motion, and with the part of her attention that was not occupied by the wound, tracking the sounds of the property outside, the road beyond, the shape of the afternoon. The wound was holding. The yarrow had done its work. There was no smell that shouldn't be there, no heat beyond what was expected at this stage. She had seen Thomas lose patients to wounds less serious than this one, because they hadn't been managed properly in the first hours, and she felt, in the clean pink of the healing tissue under her hands, something she recognized as satisfaction. The particular satisfaction of a thing done right, when everything around it was uncertain. "You're lucky," she said, tying off the last strip of linen. "I'm aware of that. I mean medically. The bullet missed everything that mattered. 2 inches in any direction." She stopped. 2 inches in any direction, and I would have found you dead in that barn instead of dying." He was quiet for a moment. "I know." She sat back. He was watching her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the one he got when he was deciding how much of something true to say. "On the platform," he said, "when I grabbed your coat. I didn't mean to pull you down with me. I know that. I want you to know I didn't choose you because you were closest." He held her gaze. "I chose you because you were the only person on that platform who was looking at me like I was a problem to be solved instead of a problem to be avoided." Harriet thought about that for a moment. "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation." The almost smile. "The compliment is that most people who know how to solve problems want to be thanked for it. You just started solving." She began repacking the medical bag. "Thomas used to say that the difference between a good doctor and a great one was whether they needed the patient to be grateful before they started working." She paused. "I was never interested in being thanked. I was interested in the problem." "What about now?" She looked up. He was still watching her, and the expression was still the careful one, the one that kept most of itself behind the eyes. But there was something different in it now, something that had not been there when she had knelt beside him in the barn, or when she had pressed her fingers to his throat on the platform, or even in the gray light of this morning when she had come back through the door and said, "There's a witness," and he had said, "Go," as if her going was a thing he had already decided to trust. What was different was that it was personal, not professional, not operational, not the assessment of a man calculating variables. Personal, directed at her specifically, at Harriet Calloway specifically, with the particular quality of attention that recognized someone rather than simply observing them. She held his gaze for one moment. Then she fastened the clasp on her medical bag. "Now, I'm interested in getting these documents to Cheyenne," she said. The door opened. Both of them moved at the same instant, Harriet's hand going to the medical bag, Wade straightening in the chair. And then they both went still, because the person in the doorway was Tommy Briggs, 14 years old, red-cheeked from hard riding, out of breath, with the specific expression of a boy delivering something important, and aware of exactly how important it was. "Mrs. McAllister sent me," he said to Harriet. "She found him." "Sutter?" "Yes, ma'am. He's in his rooms. She talked to him through the door." The boy paused, catching his breath. "He wouldn't open it, but she said to tell you he listened." "And when she told him about the federal agent and the documents, he—" Tommy stopped, seeming to search for the right word. "He what?" Harriet said. "He cried," Tommy said. He said it the way a 14-year-old boy said something he didn't entirely know what to do with, straightforwardly, and with a kind of bewildered respect. "Mrs. McAllister said he cried, and then he said he'd been waiting for someone to come, that he'd been waiting for 2 weeks for someone to come, and he'd almost given up." Harriet looked at Wade. "He'll talk," Wade said. It was not a question. "Mrs. McAllister says yes." Tommy straightened up. "She says she needs you to come. Not to his rooms, to hers. She's going to bring him to the boarding house tonight, quiet, through the back. She says it has to be tonight, before Birch's man does another sweep of the street." Harriet thought about nightfall. She thought about 2 miles to Clara's sister's farm, and Wade on horseback, and the plan they had been building carefully out of the materials available to them. She thought about Sutter, 24 years old, crying behind a locked door,
waiting for someone to come. "Tell Mrs. McAllister we'll be there," she said. Tommy nodded and went out the back the way he had come in, already moving at a run before the door was fully closed. Harriet turned to Wade. He was already working through it. She could see the recalculation happening behind his eyes, the map of the evening being redrawn. "We go to Ruth's first," she said. "Sutter, then Clara's farm. Birch's man will be watching the boarding house. Then we don't go through the front." She stood up and went to the window and looked at the angle of the afternoon light, the way the shadows fell across the yard, the back fence and the alley Ruth had shown her the night before. "Ruth knows a way in that doesn't touch the main street. She showed me last night when we left with you." Of course she did. Wade pushed himself to his feet, slowly, with the controlled deliberateness she had come to recognize as his version of managing pain, without discussing it. He reached for his coat. "You trust her completely?" "Yes." "Why?" It was a fair question, the kind of question the man who had spent years in rooms where trust was a weapon, used it as a tool rather than a virtue, asked automatically and without judgment. Harriet thought about it honestly. "Because she had nothing to gain from helping me, and she helped me anyway," she said. "And because she's been in this town for 30 years, watching Birch take things from people, and she's still here. She didn't leave. She didn't accommodate him." Harriet picked up her medical bag. She stayed, and she kept track, and she waited for something she could use. She looked at Wade. "That's not a frightened woman. That's a patient one. Those are different things, and I trust the second kind." Wade looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Your husband trained you well." "My mother trained me. Thomas refined it." She moved toward the back door. "Come on, stay close, and don't try to match my pace. We go at the speed your side allows." "My side is fine." "Your side is 2 days old, and held together with yarrow and linen and stubbornness. Tell me it's fine again, and I'll leave you here." The almost smile, full enough this time that it actually reached his eyes. "It's adequate," he said. "Better." She opened the door. "Let's go." The back route to Ruth's boarding house took them along the creek bed and through the alley behind the hardware store, moving through the spaces between buildings the towns like Redemption Creek generated without intending to. The unglamorous connective tissue of back gates and wood piles, and the narrow passages between structures that only the people who had been somewhere long enough to need them ever learned to use. They moved without speaking, Harriet setting the pace and Wade keeping it, and she was aware of him behind her, with the particular awareness she had developed in the past 24 hours. Not quite the way she had been aware of Thomas, which had been the awareness of a long and settled intimacy, but something with its own specific weight. The awareness of someone whose safety had become operationally relevant. And then, somewhere between the platform and the oilskin packet, and his name said honestly for the first time, had become something other than operational. She did not examine that thought. She filed it in the same place she filed other things that needed attention and could not have it yet. And she kept moving. Ruth's back door opened before they reached it. Ruth stood in the frame with a lamp already lit against the coming dark, and behind her, visible in the kitchen light, was a young man sitting at the table with his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, and the look of someone who had been alone with something unbearable for long enough that the presence of other people felt almost physically painful. Sutter looked up when Harriet and Wade came through the door. He was younger than she had expected, younger even than Clara had suggested, with a face that would have been ordinary under ordinary circumstances, and was currently the face of a person who had not slept properly in weeks. His eyes went from Harriet to Wade, and then to the badge that Wade had produced from somewhere on his person and laid on the table without ceremony. "Deputy United States Marshal," Wade said. "Wade Callahan, Cheyenne office." Sutter looked at the badge for a long moment. Then he looked at Wade. Then,
with the absolute exhaustion of a man who has been holding a door shut with his whole body and has finally decided to step aside, he said, "I've been keeping copies." Wade went very still. Copies of what? Every deed that went through that office. Sutter's voice was flat and slightly mechanical, the voice of someone reciting something they have rehearsed in their own head so many times it has lost its texture. Every false transfer. I made a copy of each one. Dates, names, file members. I kept them because... He stopped, swallowed. Because I knew what it was. I knew from the third one what it was, and I kept doing it because Birch told me my mother would lose her house if I didn't, and I... He stopped again. The kitchen was completely silent. "Where are the copies?" Wade said. Sutter reached into his coat and produced a folded envelope, thick with papers, worn at the edges from being handled and rehandled and carried and hidden and worried over for however many weeks it had been since he had made his decision and not yet found a way to act on it. He put it on the table beside Wade's badge. "I want protection for my mother," he said. "I want her house safe and her name out of this. And I want..." His voice broke slightly, and he steadied it with visible effort. "I want people to know I wasn't part of it willingly. That I tried to stop. That I kept the copies because I knew someone had to." Harriet looked at this young man sitting at Ruth McAllister's kitchen table with his weeks of solitary terror and his envelope of copied deeds and his desperate need to be understood rather than simply used, and she felt something in her chest respond to it with the same reflex that had responded to the pulse under her fingers on the platform. The same fierce and fundamental refusal to let something salvageable be lost. "We know," she said. "Marcus knew. That's why he kept your name in his notebook, with a note that said you were watching." She leaned forward slightly. "He didn't think you were part of it, Mr. Sutter. He thought you were a witness, waiting for a way out." Sutter looked at her. His jaw worked. He nodded once, short and unsteady, and looked back down at the table. Ruth set a plate of food in front of him without comment. He picked up the fork with the automatic compliance of someone who had forgotten to eat recently and had just been reminded. Wade picked up the envelope and opened it and began to read, and Harriet watched his face as he went through page after page of Sutter's careful, frightened record-keeping. And what she saw there was the expression of a man who has just watched a case he thought was solid become unassailable. He looked up. He met her eyes. "This is everything," he said. "I know," Ruth said from the stove without turning around. "Marcus said the same thing when he found out the boy had been keeping records." She turned then, and her expression was the same iron-gray steadiness it always was. But underneath it, something had shifted. The particular quality of a woman who has been waiting for a long time for the right moment, and has just recognized it arriving. "He said if we ever got all of it together in the same room, Birch would have nowhere left to stand." Harriet looked at the table. The oilskin packet, Sutter's envelope, the notebook from Marcus's fireplace, Clara Foss's testimony, not yet written but waiting, a mail rider who would come through tomorrow on his regular route and leave with all of it in his saddlebag, headed for Cheyenne. She thought about Marcus. She thought about Thomas. She thought about the particular arithmetic of what things cost and what they were worth, and whether the accounting ever really balanced. She thought about $4.11 and a dead man's promise, and what it felt like to step off a train into a town that didn't know her name and decide, without knowing why, to keep moving. She thought it balanced. She thought it was going to balance. Outside, the wind came up against the walls of Ruth McAllister's boarding house with that low, familiar sound, and the lamp on the table threw its small circle of light across the faces of 4 people who had each, separately and for their own reasons, decided that the cost of staying silent was higher than the cost of speaking, and who had somehow ended up in the same kitchen at the same hour, on the same side of the same fight. It was not a comfortable feeling. It was not a safe one. But Harriet had stopped requiring comfort and safety from her feelings sometime in the 2 years since Thomas died. And what she felt instead, sitting in that kitchen, with the evidence of 6 years of fraud spread across Ruth McAllister's clean table, was something she recognized from the best moments of her years beside Thomas. The particular fierce clarity of a person who knows exactly what needs to be done and has exactly the tools to do it. She reached into her medical bag and produced Marcus's notebook and set it on the table beside everything else. "We write Clara's statement tonight," she said. "All of us, together. And tomorrow, when Daniel Marsh comes through, it all goes with him." She looked around the table. Every word, every name, every number, all of it. Nobody argued. They wrote through the night. Clara Foss arrived at Ruth's boarding house at 9 o'clock, brought in through the back gate by Tommy Briggs, who had ridden to her sister's farm and back in the dark without being asked twice. She sat down at the kitchen table, read what had already been assembled, and then picked up the pen Ruth set in front of her and wrote her statement in a steady, unhurried hand that did not waver once. 4 pages, every detail. The date she had gone to the clerk's office, the name of the deputy who had pulled the file, the man at the back counter who had watched and said nothing until he had something useful to offer, the deed with George Foss's forged signature, the riders who came to her property that evening, the 30 days that became 26. When she finished, she set the pen down and pushed the pages to the center of the table and folded her hands in her lap and said, "George would have wanted this." No one responded, because there was nothing to add to it. Sutter's copies filled 11 pages when laid out in order. A meticulous, chronological record of every false deed processed through the Redemption Creek County Clerk's office over 4 years, with file numbers and dates and the names of both the displaced owners and the shell company that received the transfers. He had written them in a small, precise hand, each entry identical in format to the last. The handwriting of a young man who had understood from the beginning that if these records were ever going to matter, they needed to be exact. Wade went through them twice, checking each entry against the documents in the oilskin packet. He did not speak while he worked. Harriet watched his face and learned from it, the small tightening around his eyes when something confirmed what he already knew, the brief stillness when something exceeded it. By the time he looked up from the last page, the lamp on the table had burned a third of the way down. 7 families, he said, not 6. There's a 7th transfer here that didn't make it into Marcus's ledger. The Halverson property, north of the canyon, filed 14 months ago. He looked at Sutter. "Do you know the Halverson family?" Sutter nodded. He had eaten the food Ruth had put in front of him, and the mechanical quality had left his voice, replaced by something that was not yet ease, but was further from despair than it had been 2 hours ago. "Older couple. They moved east after the county notice. Went to live with their son in Nebraska, I think. I don't know if they're still—" "We'll find them," Wade said. It was said with the quiet certainty of a man who had done this before, who knew how federal investigations worked and what they required and what they produced. "They're on the record now. That's what matters." Harriet organized everything into the order that would make the most sense to a federal marshal reading it cold. Documents first, then the copied deeds with their dates establishing the timeline, then Clara's statement, then Marcus's notebook with the witness names, then a single page in Wade's handwriting summarizing the case and his recommendations. She did it the way she had organized Thomas's patient files, with the logic of someone who understood that the person receiving the information needed to be able to move through it quickly and arrive at certainty without unnecessary effort. When she finished, she wrapped it all in the oilskin, tied it twice, and set it on the table. "Daniel Marsh comes through at mid-morning," Ruth said. She was at the stove, had been at the stove most of the night, producing coffee and food at intervals with the relentless practicality
of a woman who understood that people working through the night needed fuel, whether or not they thought to ask for it. "He stops here first, always has." "Birch's man will be watching the street," Harriet said. "Birch's man watches the street every morning. He also drinks a cup of coffee at the saloon at 9 o'clock, because Birch doesn't start his day until 10, and there's no point watching before then." Ruth set a fresh cup in front of Wade. "Marsh comes through at 9:30. I'll have the packet ready when he arrives, and he'll leave with it in his saddlebag and ride on to his next stop the way he always does." She looked at Harriet. "Nothing out of the ordinary." "Except everything," Clara said quietly. "Except everything," Ruth agreed. They kept watch in shifts through the rest of the night, 2 sleeping while 2 stayed awake, though Harriet found that sleeping was a theoretical proposition rather than a practical one. She lay on the narrow bed in the room she had been given and looked at the ceiling, and thought about the morning with the focused, slightly detached attention of a person who has made all the decisions available to them and is now waiting for the outcomes. She thought about Marcus, who had spent 18 months collecting evidence and 30 years building a life in a town that repaid him by taking it. She thought about George Foss, who had built 300 acres worth of breeding stock and died believing it was going to last. She thought about the Halverson family, on a train to Nebraska, with whatever they could carry, leaving behind something they had built with their own hands. She thought about what Marcus had wanted to give her. Land. A start. The thing he had that a woman with $4 and a dead husband's medical bag needed most in the world. She thought about the fact that he had died before he could do it, and that the only thing she could give him in return was the thing he had been trying to do himself. She got up before dawn and went back to the kitchen. Wade was at the table, awake, the lamp low, the oilskin packet in front of him. He looked up when she came in. The gray light coming through the window made the planes of his face look older and more tired than he was, and she could see the cost of the night in the careful way he was holding himself, the controlled stillness that was not rest, but was what he had instead of it. "You should have slept," she said. "So should you." She sat across from him. The kitchen was quiet in the way that kitchens are quiet in the early morning, the particular quality of a room that has held a lot of activity and is resting between one instance of it and the next. "After Marsh leaves," she said, "what happens?" "The packet goes to Chief Marshal Hendricks in Cheyenne. He'll verify my report and move within 48 hours. Federal warrants for Birch, the Burlington attorney Harlan Voss, and whoever signed off on the transfers at the railroad's acquisition office." Wade paused. "Birch will likely have some warning. Men like Birch usually do. But it won't matter. With what's in that packet, he has nowhere to go that federal jurisdiction doesn't follow." "And the families who lost their land?" "The fraudulent transfers are void once the deeds are proven false. The properties revert." He met her eyes. "It takes time. Courts, filings, hearings. But it reverts." Harriet thought about Clara Foss writing George's name with a steady hand at midnight. "How much time?" 6 months, maybe. Less if the railroad cooperates to limit their own exposure, which they'll be advised to do. He paused. "The Halverson property is more complicated since the family relocated, but recoverable." His voice was careful and precise, the voice of a man reporting facts. But underneath the precision she could hear something else. The same thing she heard in herself when she talked about Thomas. The awareness of what the facts cost in human terms, held at arm's length, because holding it any closer made the work impossible. "You do this a lot," she said. "Cases like this." "Land fraud in the territories is the most common federal case in Wyoming right now. The railroad expansion has created more opportunity for this kind of scheme then the marshal's office has agents to investigate. He looked at the oilskin packet. Marcus Hale sent his letter to the right office at the right time. We had the capacity to respond. A year earlier, 2 years earlier, he stopped. He still would have died, Harriet said. Probably. Wade's jaw tightened. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. That bothers you.
It should bother everyone. It does. I'm asking about you specifically. He looked at her with those direct, dark eyes, and she could see him deciding again. The same decision she had watched him make at intervals across the past 36 hours. How much of the true thing to say, and whether the cost of saying it was less than the cost of not saying it. I've worked 11 cases like this in 3 years, he said. In 9 of them, someone died before we got there. Not because the office was slow, because men like Birch move fast and quietly, and they understand that the first death is the one that teaches everyone else to stay quiet. He paused. Marcus wasn't quiet. That's why he died. And it's also why we have enough to end this. Harriet thought about stubbornness as a virtue. Her mother had called it her best and worst quality. Thomas had called it the thing that made her good at the work. Marcus's letter had called her the most stubborn woman he had ever met, and meant it as the highest compliment available. He knew it might kill him, she said. He knew, and he kept going. Yes. So did you. She looked at his left side, at the place under his coat where her bandaging held. You knew Birch's men were watching you. You went to the barn anyway. It was the job. It was a choice, she said. The job gave you the reason. The choice was yours. She met his eyes. Same as Marcus. Same as Sutter keeping his copies. Same as Clara writing her statement. She paused. Some choices only look inevitable in retrospect. Wade looked at her for a long moment. The lamp between them was almost out, and the window was beginning to separate from black into gray, the same slow lightening she had watched from this same direction the morning before, a lifetime ago. What will you do? He said. After. After Marsh leaves? After all of it. After the warrants and the hearings and the land reverts? He held her gaze. Marcus's property will be part of the reversion. If the deed transfer is voided, his estate stands. He intended that land to go to you. Harriet had not let herself think about this. She had been careful not to think about it. The way she was careful not to think about things that required outcomes she couldn't control. But sitting here in the early morning, with the oilskin packet on the table between them, and 6 months of legal process standing between her and the answer, she let herself think about it for one moment. Land. A house. A property 4 miles north where the cottonwood trees leaned east, and the barn smelled of axle grease and old hay, and the thing that Marcus had built over 40 years still stood, waiting. I think I'll stay, she said, in Redemption Creek. Someone needs to. She looked at him steadily. This town is going to need things after Birch is gone. It's going to need people who aren't afraid to be here. People with reasons to stay. She paused. And there's no doctor within 40 miles. The almost smile, full and genuine. No, he said. There isn't. I'm not legally a doctor. You're not legally a nurse either. You removed a bullet from a federal agent's side in a boarding house back room with a steel probe and a bottle of carbolic. And yarrow. And yarrow. The smile reached his eyes, the way it rarely did, and what was in his eyes when it got there was the same thing she had felt moving through her chest in the moments she had not been examining. Personal, specific, directed at her and no one else. The territory has a medical licensing board. Cheyenne. I know the man who chairs it. She looked at him. "You're offering to introduce me to a licensing board. I'm offering to tell a man I know that there's a woman in Redemption Creek who saved my life and set a fractured leg and managed a wound infection in conditions that would have challenged a trained surgeon, and that the territory is wasting a considerable resource by not giving her the legal right to do what she already does." He held her gaze. "What you do with that introduction is your business." Harriet was quiet for a moment. She thought about Thomas's medical bag on the floor beside the bed in her uncle's house in Philadelphia, waiting. She thought about 4 years of standing beside a good man's work and learning it thoroughly, and being told that learning it was not the same as being permitted to do it. She thought about what her mother had said. Knowledge is the one thing no one can take away from a woman. Her mother had been wrong about that, but she hadn't been wrong about the knowledge itself. "Thank you," Harriet said. The morning came in fully around them as they sat there, and Ruth arrived in the kitchen at 7 to start the stove and found them still at the table and said nothing about it, which was the most eloquent thing she could have done. Daniel Marsh arrived at 27 minutes past 9. Harriet knew it was him before he came through the door because she heard his horse on the street, and then Ruth's voice, and then a man's voice she didn't know, easy and unhurried, the voice of a man on a regular route, doing a familiar thing. She was standing in the kitchen doorway when Ruth brought him in. He was perhaps 45, weathered and compact, with a particular self-contained quality of men who spend most of their time alone on long stretches of open ground. He looked at Harriet, then at Wade, then at the badge Wade produced and set on the table. His expression did not change substantially. "Marcus said this day might come," he said. He said it without drama, as a simple statement of fact, the way Marcus apparently said most things. "He was right," Wade said. "We need you to carry a package to Chief Marshal Hendricks in Cheyenne. Personal delivery, his hands only, today. I've got 7 stops between here and Cheyenne. Skip them. Build the federal office for the lost contracts." Wade met his eyes. "Marcus Hale trusted you with his fail-safe for a reason. I need you to be that reason today." Marsh looked at the oilskin packet Ruth placed on the table in front of him. He picked it up and felt the weight of it and set it back down. "What's in it?" "Everything that ends Edgar Birch." Marsh was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up the packet and put it inside his coat, against his chest, and buttoned the coat over it. "I'll need to stop for water at the canyon relay," he said. 2 hours out." "Stop for water," Wade said. "Don't stop for anything else." Marsh nodded once, touched the brim of his hat to Harriet in a gesture that was genuine rather than reflexive, and walked back out through the front of the boarding house to his horse, and the street, and the road south to Cheyenne. Harriet stood at the kitchen window and watched him go. Ruth stood beside her. Clara Foss was at the table with her hands around a cup of coffee, watching the middle distance with the expression of a woman who has just done the largest thing available to her and is waiting to discover what it costs. Sutter was in the chair by the stove, asleep finally, his face in sleep younger than it had any right to be. "It's done," Ruth said quietly. "The sending is done," Harriet said. "That's the part we could do." Ruth watched the street through the glass. Marsh was already gone, around the corner, already a man on a regular mail route doing a familiar thing. "The rest isn't ours." "No," Harriet turned from the window. "But it will be." Birch's man came through the street at 10 o'clock as usual, and found nothing unusual to report, and went back to report nothing unusual. And that was the last ordinary hour Redemption Creek had for some time. The federal warrants arrived on the 4th day, not from Cheyenne, as Harriet had expected, but from the nearest federal circuit office, activated by a telegraph from Chief Marshal Hendricks that had apparently moved faster than any telegraph Harriet had previously heard of. with the particular velocity of a man who had been waiting for this case to be airtight and had just received confirmation that it was. 4 deputy marshals rode into Redemption Creek on a Wednesday morning. They arrested Edgar Birch at his home before breakfast, with the warrants read aloud on his front porch in front of 3 ranch hands and his housekeeper, and a boy of perhaps 10 who had been sent to fetch the morning water and stopped to watch. They arrested the deputy clerk Sutter had identified as complicit, not the young Sutter himself, who had been formally designated a cooperative witness, but an older man who had processed the original transfers with full knowledge and had been on Birch's payroll for a decade. The Burlington Railroad's Wyoming Acquisition Office sent 2 attorneys from Denver within the week, not to defend the company's actions, but to negotiate the terms of their cooperation with the federal investigation. It was, one of the deputy marshals told Wade with dry professional satisfaction, the fastest corporate cooperation he had seen in 12 years of federal work. Harlan Voss, the railroad attorney whose letters were in the oilskin packet, resigned his position and retained his own counsel before the formal charges reached him. It did not help him substantially. Marcus Hale had kept very good records. Wade testified before the federal court in Cheyenne 6 weeks after leaving Redemption Creek, walking into that courtroom without a limp and with the full use of his left side, and the particular bearing of a man who had been shot in service of something that had come out the right way. He answered every question directly and completely. Harriet's name appeared 4 times in his formal testimony, each time as the person who had made a critical decision at a critical moment, named without embellishment, with the precision of a man who understood that accuracy was the highest form of respect. Clara Foss testified on the 3rd day of hearings. She wore the same straight-backed steadiness she had brought to Ruth McAllister's kitchen table at midnight, and she read her statement aloud in a clear, unhurried voice. And when she was finished, she folded the pages and said, "George built that ranch for 30 years. I want it back." And the federal court reporter wrote it down, word for word. The land reversion took 5 months, not 6. The Halverson family was located in Nebraska and notified by federal letter. 2 of the 7 families returned to their properties. 3 accepted settlements in lieu of return. Clara Foss came back to her ranch on a Tuesday in April with her daughter from Denver and Ruth McAllister and Harriet, and she walked through the front door of the house George had built and stood in the kitchen for a long time without speaking, and no one asked her to. Marcus Hale's property reverted to his estate in March. The estate had no family to contest the inheritance he had specified in his legal will, filed in the Redemption Creek County records 3 years before his death, naming Harriet Calloway as his sole heir. The county attorney who processed it was new to the office, the previous attorney having resigned in the aftermath of the federal investigation, and he told Harriet when she came to sign the papers that in 30 years of practice he had never seen a will that was clearer or more deliberately constructed. "He wanted to make sure it held," the attorney said. "He was a careful man," Harriet said. She drove out to the property that afternoon alone, in the wagon Ruth had lent her, along the north road past the cottonwood trees that leaned east. The house was cold and needed work, and the barn needed a new door, and the kitchen garden was the ruin of something that had once been tended with love, bare and flat under the spring sky. She stood in the yard and looked at all of it, the work of it, the scale of it, the particular reality of a thing that had existed only as possibility for so long, and had now become simply, concretely, hers. She had a meeting in Cheyenne the following week with the man who chaired the territory's medical licensing board. Wade had written the introduction 3 months ago from his office in Cheyenne, a single page, formally worded, that described what Harriet had done, with the professional neutrality of an official document, and contained, somewhere in the precise language of its 3rd paragraph, the clearest statement of regard she had ever received from anyone who wasn't Thomas. She had read it twice. Then she had put it in her medical bag, beside the carbolic bottle and the yarrow and the probe that had been Thomas's. And she had written back to the licensing board, with the particular directness she brought to everything that mattered. And she had waited. The letter confirming the meeting had arrived on the same day as the property deed. She thought about that for a moment, standing in Marcus Hale's yard in the spring light. The particular timing of things, the way certain days arrived, carrying more than one future at once, requiring you to hold them all at the same time, without dropping any of them. She heard the horse before she saw it, coming from the south road, moving at a steady pace. She turned. Wade Callahan rode into the yard, looking nothing like the man she had found bleeding on Marcus's barn floor, and everything like the man she had come to know in the months since. Upright, deliberate, with those direct dark eyes that she had learned to read the way she had learned to read patience, by what was present rather than what was performed. He dismounted and tied the horse at the post, and walked across the yard and stopped a few feet from her, and looked at her the way he had looked at her in Ruth's kitchen in the early morning, personal and specific, and without the careful management of it that he usually maintained. "The deed went through," he said, "this morning." He looked at the house, the barn, the yard, then back at her. "It needs work. I know. The kitchen garden is salvageable. The soil's good. I know that too." He was quiet for a moment. She waited, because she had learned that his silences were not absence, but the presence of something being decided, and that what came out of them was always worth the wait. "I put in for a reassignment," he said. "Territory Field Office, based in Redemption Creek. It's a smaller jurisdiction, but the work—" He stopped. "There's enough work." Harriet looked at him. "You're staying?" "I'm asking if that's something you can manage." She thought about what he was asking, beneath what he was asking. Not just geographic proximity, not just professional practicality, but the whole of it, the specific and complicated whole of two people who had met in a barn at midnight, and lied to each other, and told each other the truth, and kept each other alive through the particular intensity of 4 days that had compressed something that might otherwise have taken years into a shape they both already recognized. She thought about Thomas, who had been steady and kind, and had loved her completely, and who would have told her, in his precise and affectionate way, that grief was not a reason to stop living in the direction of things that mattered. "I think," Harriet said, "that a territory field office needs a proper premises." Wade looked at the house. "The second bedroom would need to be an office," she said, "with a door that closes." "That's reasonable. And I won't be interrupted when I'm with patients." "Also reasonable. And when I'm wrong about something medical, I expect you to tell me. And when you're wrong about something legal, I'll tell you, and neither of us will pretend otherwise to make the other one feel better." "Agreed." She looked at him. He looked at her. The spring light was the kind that made everything slightly more real than it usually was, and in it his face was open and honest, and completely without the careful management she had watched him practice for so long. And what was there instead was exactly what had been building since the moment she had pressed 2 fingers to his throat in a dark barn and felt his pulse answer her. "All right then," Harriet said. She turned toward the house, and he fell into step beside her, and they walked together through the door that Marcus Hale had opened 30 years ago, and tended carefully and kept open across 40 years of this particular, unforgiving, honest land, and closed it behind them. Harriet Calloway, licensed by the Wyoming Territory Medical Board in May of 1888, was the first practicing physician in Redemption Creek. She was not the last, but she was the first, and in that town, in those years, first meant the person who stood in the door and held it open for everyone who came after. And that was exactly who she had always been, even before anyone had the sense to let her prove it.